So for our mock draft here, we are going to be doing 3 rounds of a 12-team mock draft. Now, obviously, there's just 2 of us. We are actually going to be drafting every single team here. We're not going to be doing any sim style thing like we did preseason last year because we want to really break down how we see the rankings shaking out early here for next season. Obviously, a lot can change, but fun little exercise here to fill the bye week for the Pro Bowl. So what we're going to do here, Cody will have the final say on all of the odd picks. I will have the final say on all the even, but we will be going back and forth here talking. So why don't we just kick it right off here? Round 1, pick 1. Top of the board. This year's interesting. We don't know if it's going to be a running back first. Wide receivers are creeping up the board. Or if it's probably going to be a running back. Which one? Cody, where do you think you want to go first overall?
For me, the first pick is easy.
Okay.
It really is. I know it. For me, you're still going running back at the top of the draft. I think there's realistically only 2 running backs that have potential to be superstars. Well, I shouldn't say that. Are safe picks to be superstars. I think there's some others lower in the draft board that we'll get to that have some, bounce back potential. But for me, it is the guy that, was in the MVP argument. He got the most, red zone carries attempts ever for a quarterback. That is, or for a running back, I should say. That is Jonathan Taylor, running back for the Indianapolis Colts. For me, he'll probably be my number 1 running back all season long, especially, and if we're looking, we don't know who their quarterback will be. We expect it to be Carson Wentz. Maybe if they go out and get a guy like Aaron Rodgers, think he'll be a little bit more pass heavy, go out and get a Russell Wilson, be a little more pass heavy. I might, then start consider Derrick Henry for a number 1. But with Carson Wentz wanting to run the ball, how much they used Jonathan Taylor, what their record was when he had 100-yard rushing games versus they weren't. I believe they only lost 1 game that he had over 100-yard rushing, but they didn't win a single one when he didn't have 100 yards rushing. That just goes to show on how important he is. So for me, first overall, 101, no questions asked, Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I don't think I would have argued you too much there. I think there's probably 2 running backs that I would consider at the top of the board, which is weird because I feel like the last few years, it's always been a group of 4, a group of 5, a group of 6. I think I've narrowed down to 2. So you took your guy, Jonathan Taylor, at number 1. I'm going to take the other guy in that group, in my opinion, at number 2. And maybe it sounds sketchy because he didn't have a great playoff appearance when he came back from his injury, but that's Derrick Henry. So we have to worry a little bit because this is the first time he's actually missed significant time for injury. He's been one of the top running backs because obviously he does put up big games, but he's been so durable and hasn't missed much time. But I think that the foot injury is kind of a fluke thing. It's not like he tore his ACL and it's something that we think is going to have more of a long-term effect. I'm not worried about the playoff game because I think he's always been a running back that needs to take time to get up to speed, evidenced by the fact that weeks 1 through 3 are his weakest part of the season. He always, once he hits like week 5, 6, 7, he comes on to mid-season Derrick Henry and starts rolling over people for 200 yards at will. So he's still my guy. I'm not worried about the injury. I'm not worried about him starting slow because we've seen it so many times, and I don't like drafting for injuries anyway. There's just so many running backs that it's starting to creep in my head. For some of those running backs, you have to. He's not one in that group yet.
Yeah, for me, Derrick Henry would be number 2. I was worried about it last year, or I said it during our draft shows. I did think that there might be a chance of injury because he's used so much. And he is getting up there in terms of age for a running back. Now, Derrick Henry is not built like most running backs. He can take definitely a beating. So I will have some hesitations, have that thought in the back of my mind. Will he be able to make it a full season? But I'm still going to bet on Derrick Henry to do so, at least for this year. As the years progress, I think we'll have to take that more into consideration. So I do like your pick for 2 overall at Derrick Henry. Moving on to number 3 overall. This is where I think the draft really starts. I think most drafts, all the way up until it's time to draft, unless one of them has an offseason injury, which we're not hoping for, they'll go 1, 2 in some order in most drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3 is by far the most interesting, because we used to have a big 4 of running backs. I don't think we have a big 4 anymore. Do you start taking a wide receiver? here.
What wide
That is
receiver do you take if you
which wide
do?
receiver do you take? Do you chase Cooper Kupp, which I don't think we realize how good Cooper Kupp has a season. Again, I'm stealing this quote from the Fantasy Footballers podcast. They do great work, and I take a lot of stuff from them. But if Cooper Kupp was the number one wide receiver hands down in fantasy football in 2020, he had 16 touchdowns. If you take away the points for all 16 of those touchdowns, where does he finish? You want to take a guess?
I'll say wide receiver 3.
5, but you were close. Wide receiver 5.
I thought I was pretty high.
He was in wide receiver 5 on the season, taking away 16 touchdowns.
This is insane.
And
That's absolutely insane.
So Derrick Henry is in consideration for me. Or I'm sorry, Cooper Kupp. I don't know. Derrick Henry was the last pick. I was reading the rundown when I was talking. Cooper Kupp is in consideration. Do I still go running back here? I'm debating if I would go running back here. It would be a guy like Naji Harris or Austin Eckler. Those would be the next 2 running backs on my big board.
Okay.
I passed, CMC, Dalvin, like one of those guys would be the next on my big board. But I think I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp. I'm not even guaranteeing that he'll be wide receiver 1 next year. Like, I think Devontae Adams could still be that. But right now, with the question marks of where Adams will be, I mean, if Adams was with Rodgers, I think this makes this conversation even more, but we don't know this at this time. So for me, I think Cooper Kupp, as long as Matt Stafford's there, Matt Stafford likes to tend into a guy. I know they want Odell Beckham Jr. back. I know they have Van Jefferson. I know Robert Woods will be back. But we saw all season Cooper Kupp's worst game was 9.5 points in half-point PPR last year. Like, even if he gets a half of the production, he is still a valuable top pick in the draft.
It's true. I mean, I didn't know where to go like how early to go wide receiver. I think Kupp was probably my top guy, but you understand how like I would be a little skeptical because I hate wide receiver trios, and I believe Odell Beckham will probably be back. I know Robert Woods will be coming back at least at some point next season from his ACL injury. Whether it not be week 1, it'd probably still be early part of the season. And then they have 3-4 guys if you count Van Jefferson too. It's a crowded offense. But like you said, Matt Stafford just seemed to take a liking to Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp has stepped up in so many ways to almost become that quarterback playing wide receiver. So you can almost, blindly throw the ball to him and know exactly where he's going to be, which is the quarterback's best friend. That's why we always talk about the tight end, because normally tight ends are running those check down routes or the routes that's very predictable for the quarterback to read. Cooper Kupp is almost that guy, except he's so much more explosive, being able to run after the catch, run more routes than a normal tight end does. It's amazing what he did, and that stat of him finishing 5th with no touchdowns is something I didn't know, and it's absolutely unbelievable. Now we move on to pick 4. I don't know if I want to take another wide receiver right away. I would probably stick with the running back game. And I didn't want to sound like somebody who was still jumping on the Austin Eckler hype train. But now knowing that he's also in your next group of running backs, he might be the guy I would lean right here at number 4. Especially when we're talking in a half PPR format, which is the way we like to play. He gets so many catches out of the backfield. While he might not be the most durable, he is one of the higher ceilings at running back right now and one of the more consistent guys when he is on the field. So I'm going to stick with Austin Eckler at 4. And I don't know.
I think it's a great pick. That's who I would have taken if you didn't. He would have been my next guy.
Okay.
I don't have the full stats in front of me, but he did only miss 1 game last year, so he was pretty durable. I believe he didn't have a single rushing touchdown outside of the red zone. So like he didn't have any big rushing,
What you worry about him being more of a short yardage guy with the style of back he is, but knowing that he is a short yardage guy in that offense still is good to know.
And it's a high powered offense. We expect, a lot of points from, and so I think Eckler is a good fit here. That puts me back on the clock again at pick 5. And again, it's another tough, situation. Do I go back to the wide receiver well? Do I go with another running back? I think for me, at this point, I'm going to stick with the running back. And this is one of my least favorite picks of the whole draft is pick 5. I feel like it is no matter where we're at. But for pick 5, I'm going to take Naji Harris. Now, he had, an incredible season. The big question mark, who is going to be at quarterback? Because he got a lot of his points last year coming off receptions because Big Ben, was checking it down a lot to him.
Mhm.
But he is one of the few full-time workload running backs we have in the NFL. You can argue his workload was even bigger than Jonathan Taylor because he had guys like Nyheim Hines behind him that would get some playing field. Najee Harris was on the field like 90% of the times and 90% of the games. Like, he just got the workload. Now, that does scare me a little bit. I will say that we could have saw his ceiling his rookie year, and he doesn't ever reach that potential. I do think you have that with Najee Harris, but he's a young guy. He could be the focal point of this offense. Again, the quarterback is a huge question mark, but I do think he is warranted enough for the 5th overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, because he is one of the guys who is a true 3-down back left in the league, like those three really. I mean, I don't even know. I guess Eckler is technically playing as a 3-down back, but he doesn't normally fit the mold of 3-down back. Those guys have to go at the top of the list. And now after that, I'm left with, do I go to my next tier running backs or do I go back to the wide receiver position? I am honestly, I'm just going to tell you, I'm really torn between two guys, and that would be going back to Christian McCaffrey because I know of his upside. You just hope he stays healthy because if he does, he can go off for 20 points every single week. Or going to Davante Adams because I think there's a very good chance of no matter where he goes, he's going to be with Aaron Rodgers. It just seems like that is the way it's going to go. He's a free agent. If Rodgers leaves Green Bay, he said he wants to go with. So I think I'm going to take the slightly, I don't know if it's a safer pick or not. I'll take the safer pick, and I'm going to go with Davante Adams, get 2 running backs off the board in the first half of the first round, which is very unlike not only my draft strategy, but the draft strategy of most fantasy owners in these last few years.
No, I'm with you. Adams was in consideration for me with Najee Harris. I do think it's also worth noting, the quarterback is definitely a big question mark at this point. Don't get me wrong. There is the reports out there that Rodgers, wherever he goes, wants Adams with him, so on. If Adams is a free agent, with that said, I don't expect Adams to ever hit the market. I think he'll be franchise tagged. So the pipe dream of him going with Rodgers, if Rodgers retires or goes somewhere else, could not be a reality. In all honesty, which I understand why he wants there. Adams is like on the brink of a Hall of Fame career, so he wants to stay with a Hall of Fame quarterback to make sure he gets a gold jacket.
Yeah.
But I will remind you that Adams' coming out party, statement party, saying I've arrived in the NFL, did not come with Aaron Rodgers. It came with Brett Hundley.
Oh.
Aaron Rodgers missed some games with a broken collarbone. That was the year that Davante Adams broke out. We started to see glimmers of hope. We saw it early in the season with Rodgers, but Davante Adams showed his dominance in the NFL with Brett Hundley as quarterback. So I think Adams is pretty safe no matter who is the quarterback, whether it's Jordan Love, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, whether it's Derek Carr, whether it's someone else. I think Adams is a safe guy. Now, granted, if it's not Rodgers, he might drop a few more picks. He might go behind the guy that I'm going to take with the next pick. I'm actually going to stay with the wide receivers. And for my next pick at pick 7, the guy that I think has potential, and another big question mark on who the quarterback will be, but that is Justin Jefferson. He has been dominant his first 2 seasons as a pro. He's always open. Even when Adam Thielen went out this past year, we are like, oh, they'll just double cover Justin Jefferson. They didn't. He is a rising star in the league. If he doesn't have Kirk Cousins, I still think he'll be, a solid top wide receiver option. If Adams doesn't have Aaron Rodgers, I might actually flip these two. But for me, Justin Jefferson fits right in here at pick 7.
All right. I mean, he would have been the other wide receiver in my, I guess, second tier of wide receivers if you want to put Cooper Kupp alone in the top tier at this point. But I still think Adams is a safer pick. I don't hate you taking Jefferson there, but I think that kind of locks me in at pick 8 with going with the upside and going with Christian McCaffrey. Because at pick 8, I feel a little bit more confident that I can have a solid second round pick come back around to me. If McCaffrey does end up having another injury riddled season, I think you can probably balance it out a little bit better. But there's no doubt that you're getting a steal at pick 8 if McCaffrey stays on the field because, oh my God, if I could turn an eighth an eighth overall pick into 20 points a week, I would be doing it every single day. So I understand a lot of people have a grudge against him. He just can't fall much further than this in drafts, in my opinion, knowing his upside.
Yeah, I am with you. CMC was in consideration at pick 7. I do like him here at pick 8. Again, this is a great spot to be in because you have potential to get the number 1 running back in fantasy at pick 8. That is a huge win for you if it happens. Now, it's been 3 years since we've actually seen that happen, so there's a lot of question marks. Will he stay healthy? It's a big one. You know the risk you're taking, but I do like the pick there at pick 8. I'm on to pick 9. I'm staying with another injured running back, or running back that gets injured, decently amounts of times. It sucks to say. I'm staying with the Minnesota Vikings, though. My next pick will be Dalvin Cook. Again, these are guys that, were top 4 draft picks the last 2 seasons. They're falling a little bit because they can't stay healthy. Dalvin Cook had his big game that came back, but he then lost a lot of people in the playoffs. He was very up and down near the end of the season. There's a lot of grudge against him. And again, you shouldn't draft, players that, hurt you in years prior. You shouldn't, take a stance against them. But I know for me personally, like I will never draft DeAndre Hopkins. As good as he is, he just never is consistent enough for me when he's on my team. I love him as a player. I love watching him on Sundays, but he will never be on my fantasy football team. That's just how it goes. That's not how you should play fantasy football. I'm not advocating for it, but I understand why there are people out there like that. And again, I think 8 and 9 as of our draft seems like a sweet spot because of the potential, but you also going in realizing that you could be disappointed. And I will say that Alexander Mattison is a free agent this year, so he might not be back. So look at that Vikings depth chart if you do get Dalvin Cook.
Man, what are the odds that Madison goes somewhere and gets a starting gig? And how high would you take him if he gets a starting gig?
It would depend on the team for sure. Who they have. Will it be a committee? That kind of, aspect of it too. But like if he goes, we talked about this off, and I don't want to like spoil any picks, but we talked about Melvin Gordon going to the Buffalo Bills and how great that would be. But Alexander Mattison would be right there with a guy that
Yeah,
would make a lot of sense for the Bills, even though Devin Singletary, hey, he's making me think about him in this draft, the way he's been playing in the playoffs, but definitely worth taking a look at.
definitely. So now we move on to pick number 10. We're getting closer to the turn. It might be somewhere you can take a couple other risks. I'm debating a wide receiver or two in this pick, but the traditionalist in me has the running backs winning out. And I'm going to go with a guy who made a lot of rise on the draft board, I think, from his play this season. And he might still be a little bit of a risk, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's going to go for me here at pick 10. I mean, maybe I'm a bigger Mixon guy than some people, but I think he definitely falls solidly into this next group of backs. Like he was constantly going as a late second round pick last year. Now I think he's going to fall into this like Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara kind of area, which is near the end of the first round. And for whatever reason, he's just my favorite of that group at the moment.
No, Joe Mixon finishes running back 3, and he's not getting any respect. Now,
Yeah.
he wasn't as consistent as you might have liked. He had some rough
Which is
spots
probably
in the
why
middle
it
of the
falls
season.
this far.
And I think the bigger question is, the playmakers they have on offense. We've seen Joe Burrow carrying this team. How much are they still going to be a run heavy team moving into next season? I think that's a huge question mark. I do like Joe Mixon a lot. I do have 2 other running backs ahead of him on my way too early rankings. But again, I'm a huge Joe Mixon fan. I feel like I always have to nerf myself on how much I talk about Joe Mixon. So I love the pick there. At pick 11, though, it's going to be tough for me on, running back or wide receiver. And the big question mark is Deebo Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
He finished as wide receiver number 2. He had all the receiving touchdowns, reception yards, but then the second half of the season, he added the rushing touchdowns. They're expected to, Elijah Mitchell will be back. They traded up to get Trey Sermon. Will they bring Raheem Mostert back on a cheap contract recovering from his ACL injury? Will this go, or will he be used as much? That's why I'm having such a hard time with Deebo Samuel. Will a quarterback play a difference? Trey Lance, could this be a run-first offense with, him being more of a gadget player? That could be a very interesting formula for me. And then there's the guy that I feel like gets lower and lower every year, for me, I'm having a hard time debating between is Alvin Kamara. Those are the two guys I'm really, debating hard here at pick 11. But I think I'm going to shoot for the stars, take the high upside here, and go with Deebo Samuel.
I like it. So Deebo Samuel there at 11. And that gives me an idea on the turn, because I honestly would have probably picked Deebo Samuel on the turn because I like the upside. I like how much he is breaking out, and he probably was the second most effective wide receiver in the league this year, behind Cooper Kupp. I mean, you can throw Devontae Adams up in there as well, but like when you talk about those explosive guys that deserved MVP conversation, all that, Deebo Samuel's right up there below Cooper Kupp. So being able to get somebody with that kind of upside at number 11 and knowing you're coming back in 2 picks to get another guy is a solid pick. I've traditionally been somebody on the turn who went to running back. I almost think this year, even though there's more wide receivers going in the first round than ever before, most likely, I want to go running back / wide receiver here back to back. So I'm just going to announce my first pick, and it's going to be the walking touchdown Tyreek Hill. So this is about where he went last year. I don't think he did anything to warrant getting any worse. I understand he was inconsistent, but he still obviously has the ability to go up there and put 40 points up on a whim. So knowing that you can take him and come right back around and get a solid RB1 in the next pick is why I'm taking Tyreek Hill there.
I like it. I had one other guy ahead of him on my rankings, but I think it is a very value argument on Tyreek Hill.
And now going into the second round, pick 13, in this tier of running backs are so close, because I already mentioned that I have Nick Chubb in this tier. I mentioned I have Alvin Kamara in this tier, and I have Javonte Williams as well. Javonte Williams might be a little bit of a risk because you don't know what he's going to be like as a solid number 1 guy if Melvin Gordon does leave, or for whatever reason they bring him back, which I don't see happening. He ends up being in a split again, and he's good, but not great. But I really like him being a star running back. But do I like him more than the upside we know Alvin Kamara could have? That's my question. I think on a whim here, I'm going to go ahead and take Kamara at this pick, but I was really strongly considering Javonte Williams.
Good. Javonte Williams, my next pick.
See, I'm glad I'm not the only one that was that high on there.
No, I had Kamara slightly a little bit higher. He is ranked 1 spot higher for me, but I like Javonte Williams. I think he'll do well. I do think they'll get another back in there to split some time with them. He does come. I mean, their new head coach is Nathaniel Hackett. They're bringing over the Packers tight end coach to be the offensive coordinator. They're bringing in the Vikings offensive coordinator to be the quarterback's coach. So there's a lot of familiarity on that system of, wanting to be 2 running backs, but building off of the run. So I do like Javonte Williams. Don't be afraid if they do bring in a second running back. He'll get sprinkled in intermittently, but he showed he could be a guy out of the backfield as a pass catcher. So I think Javonte Williams, and I think sitting here with Team 11, getting Deebo Samuel and Javonte Williams, they are both. This team doesn't feel safe at this point. It feels like big reaches, but if you actually evaluate the players this early in the process, you think, wow, I really like this combo and setting myself up to succeed down the stretch.
Definitely. I mean, and it's kind of a toss-up of like, do you like Samuel or Williams better? Do you like Hill or Kamara? Like Hill and Kamara have been the guys that have been around and have both been first-round picks multiple times, and we know that they have that big upside. Samuel and Williams seem to be the new kids on the block. Like, I mean, Samuel's been around for a few years, but this was really his breakout year. And yeah, like you said, it does feel like they're reaches, but they're really not reaches. These guys have shown that they belong to be picked this high. They have a chance to be difference makers in fantasy. Maybe taking both of them together is a little bit of a risk, but I personally like it. So we're going back to team 10 here with our next pick. We already have Joe Mixon on there. So I kind of want to go with a wide receiver here. And the next guy on my wide receiver board is Jamar Chase. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick it.
Ooh.
I know that's bold because you already have Mixon. That's 2 in the same offense in the first 2 rounds. Not something I normally advise, but it's a way too early ranking. I want to show that I have Jamar Chase above the next set of receivers. but maybe it's a risk that you want to take if you do think it's going to be an offense that's going to be consistent. That was one of the more consistent offenses this season, even against strong defenses. Like, you have an example, like they go against Baltimore and they put up 40 points. Teams were struggling a lot of times when they don't have a solid offense to put up 20 on them. So it's bold. I'm just going to go with it.
Wow, the doubling up on the Bengals. George is all in on the hype train. Make sure you grab Evan McPherson about around 12 for that team. Make sure you go full Bengals heading into next year. But I do like the pick. I don't know if I would have paired him with Joe Mixon if I was
Yeah.
looking for another option. I did have one more wide receiver, a little bit higher, and he's still available. So I'll take him now. He's a former teammate of Dalvin Cook, and that is Stefan Diggs. I do know he had a little bit of a down year this past year. I know there's a new offensive coordinator here, with Brian Daboll getting the job with the Giants, but Diggs, you saw he would get the targets. I know everyone's going to remember the Gabriel Davis 4-touchdown game. Isaiah McKenzie got a few snaps, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, but I think some of those guys like Emmanuel Sanders probably moves on. Cole Beasley, we'll see what he comes back. And I think Diggs becomes a more prominent part of this offense. And he is one of the top end wide receivers. We were taking him around the same spot last year. There was some disappointment, but I think he'll rebound nicely heading into 2022.
Yes, I mean, Diggs and Chase were close. I think I just like Chase better, and I get the whole it was sketchy to do that, but I think pairing Dalvin Cook with Stefan Diggs is a solid draft strategy there. Moving on to Team 8, who has Christian McCaffrey. Now, how bold do you want to go with somebody that you took as a risk, but with high upside? Like, do you want to go all in on the I'm going to take high upside here? Or do you want to try to bring it back and be more safe? But the other thing is, how safe do you go here? Like,
I'm going bold. If I took CMC, I'm going bold.
Okay.
That's
Okay, that'll push me in that. All right, I'll go Travis Kelce. Take the tight end position early.
Okay, that was not where I thought you were going.
Okay. I mean, there were a couple running backs on my board that I thought about, but I mean, if you're going to go bold, go ahead and get the jump on the position that we all thought was fixed this year, and then all of a sudden it wasn't fixed. Travis Kelce was still one of the best tight ends in the league. I think he was number 2 behind Mark Andrews when it was all said and done, and that offense is solid. So he's going to still be in the second round. I don't know how far down the second round. Maybe there's some drafts will be drafted in the first round still. You don't know, but he's still the number 1 tight end off the board, in my opinion.
Yeah, I still think he's the number 1 tight end. That's not who I was trying to push you towards by any means. I thought we'd go bold with, another running back that's dynamic but often injured, which I'm not going to take. I'm not going to take here. This is so tough for me. We're into that point because if I'm looking at my rankings now, we've taken, one more running back than wide receiver because of the tight end, but we're pretty 50-50 on what we're doing. But there's so many running backs in this next tier that like my next guy on my list is DeAndre Swift, but then like 10 people down is Saquon Barkley. So it's like, how much of a difference am I really looking at right here? And I do think there is one big name wide receiver that won't get talked about, to pair with Justin Jefferson, which I think will be a lot of fun. It'd be fun rooting for. And I'm going to do it. Maybe it's because I won the championship on the no running back strategy and I like it here, but for Team 7, I'm going to add AJ Brown to Justin Jefferson, the top guy in Tennessee. And we're just going to go out there and hope to pick up, some running backs in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round that are suitable enough to carry us to a championship.
And honestly, like you said, it does make sense because this next running back tier is so deep. Like at the beginning, we were kind of nitpicking, like, oh, there's 2 running backs at the top and there's 1 wide receiver. And then the next tier's 2 wide receivers and two running backs. Like now I feel like you open it up and yeah, the difference between what is it, RB like 8 and RB 15 are not that far apart. They have a lot of the same storylines of maybe they're guys that have done it before and have been injured and have been underperforming lately. Or maybe it's somebody who's on the rise but has a lot of question marks. Like that's exactly where we're at right now. But with that being said, I almost feel like that kind of finished that next tier of wide receivers for me. So I'd probably going to dip into one of those running backs. now when we're looking at Team 6 to pair with Devontae Adams, because I don't think there's the quite as dynamic wide receiver 2 to go here. I probably would have taken A.J. Brown if you didn't. But here I'm going to go with probably Nick Chubb. Give me Nick Chubb.
All right, Nick Chubb to pair up with Devontae Adams. Great pick right there. Nick Chubb was I think running back 5 or 6 in most cases last year, so falling all the way to the second round, pick 18. That's pretty good value there. Again, a little bit of a down season, but he proved he could be a promising running back. But I'm with you. There's just so many running backs here that I can make a case for. So especially now that I'm on the clock for Team 5, and we did take Naji Harris in the first round, I kind of don't want to double up here because I know I can get a solid one in round 3. With that said, which wide receiver do I want to take? Because I feel like we did dip a little bit there. Do I want to go even snide or, even more bold and add another tight end? I still think it's a little bit too early for a second tight end at this point. So I'm going to go with the guy that finished as a top, a wide receiver 1 last season. It's again, it feels a little high. We don't know who his running mate is going to be. Will Mike Williams be back? So obviously I'm talking about Keenan Allen. And as of right now, I think it'll be hard for them to bring, they have a ton of cap space. So maybe they will bring Mike Williams back. I know there's been some whispers of possibly Devontae if he hits the market there because he loves playing with Keenan Allen. If Devontae goes there, I think Keenan Allen's drops a lot. Keenan Allen, again, this is another safe pick. I think with Harris and Allen, we're going very safe for the board. We're giving what the board is taking us. We're not making any bold chances.
Yeah.
So I don't hate the draft strategy here for Team 5. It's just very safe. It's almost best player available, the guy at the top of your board. You're just going with the flow.
Yeah, exactly. And he was the next wide receiver on my board. I just didn't know if I could take him over some of the running backs, even though I get it. There's not a big disparity between running backs in this section of the draft. I just didn't know if I could take Keenan Allen quite that early for my liking. He probably would have fell another 3 or 4 picks if it was me picking solo, but it's not a bad pick. We don't know who his running mate's going to be, but I think just that offense and how explosive it is, you're not going to have to worry about Keenan Allen being a problem for your team. He's going to be an asset. It just almost depends how much of an asset he's going to be. Going to Team 4, where we have Austin Eckler as our first pick, going into our next one here. I'm still kind of sitting here on the running back position, even though we did take a running back first, just because now, especially with Keenan Allen gone, I like the wide receivers coming up next, even just a slightly less. Do I go bold with someone like DeAndre Swift, who had injury problems, but we know his upside? Do we go with someone who was almost a forgotten man last year with Antonio Gibson? He kind of did give a bad taste on our mouth at some points, but we know that he can be a top back, and he actually still finished ahead of Nick Chubb in fantasy points, which we didn't seem to believe, and he's someone I just took. But I think I'm going to go with somebody who we are seeing emerge in the playoffs. Give me Cam Akers.
All right, Cam Akers. He would be the second running back left on my board, number 2. So I do like the pick here. For me, it's a great pick. I would have probably consider him with my next pick, but I'm not going to be bold and double up on the teammates like you did. And since Team 3 has Cooper Kupp, you know what? I'm just going to do it. This is a fun exercise, but I'm going to go for the PPR machine with Cooper Kupp, and that's going to be my name, the PPR machine. Cooper Kupp, and give me Jalen Waddle.
Ooh, I like it. That is maybe a little higher than I thought, but he deserves to be in consideration for a second round pick next year, and that might just be too rich for some people's blood, but if he falls into your third round, he could be one of the steals of the draft, I think.
Yeah, I know I just took him over a guy like CeeDee Lamb, over DeAndre Hopkins, who are on more explosive offenses. And again, this is a half point PPR formula, so that played into it a little bit. If it's full point PPR, I think it goes up. We still don't know who their head coach is, so he'll be a big mover this offseason. If they would move on from Tua, bring in another guy, we could see some changes in that aspect of it too. But I have Cooper Kupp So I think he's pretty safe to cover me if for going into next season. So why not take a home run swing at a guy that could finish top 5? He might finish at 15, 24, somewhere between there. But at least I have Cooper Kupp there to balance it out. That was my thought process behind it.
That makes sense. That does make sense. And I I don't need to back up Jalen Waddle anymore. We all know how big of a fan I am of him, and we saw the breakout. So now we're looking at team 2, who has Derrick Henry. You keep taking the wide receivers out for me, where I'm like, maybe I'll think about this guy next, and now I just keep kind of pushing it back. But I don't have a pick on this turn. And I think the turn is where I kind of like him the most. And I don't know if I like him falling past your next 2 picks. So I'm going to be the guy to pick the next tight end. And I'm just going to go ahead and take Mark Andrews here. I think that 2 to 3 turn, like these 4 picks right here, are I think about the sweet spot of where I'd want him to go.
I like the Mark Andrews pick there. I'll let you know you could have got him on the turn. Coming
Okay.
back around, he would not have been the next guy pick for me. I'm going because I have Jonathan Taylor, and it's so long until I get back down. Now, there's a lot of running backs I still like here. There's like I mentioned, like I still have I think 10 guys until I get to Saquon Barkley. And not saying there's a reason he's down there that low, but that is another guy that he could win people leagues next year because he'll be drafted in the 3rd through 5th round and could potentially, finish as RB1 because he just hasn't been healthy enough and we don't trust the Giants as much for me. So I am going to go wide receiver here again to pair with Jonathan Taylor. I just think that the wide receivers are more valuable, and I am going to take a guy I just mentioned, and that is CeeDee Lamb, the top the number 1 option for the Dallas Cowboys. High-powered offense we expect coming into the next season. Oh, I was like, what are you typing? He typed compact disc-land. I like that. Compact disc-land. But I am on the turn starting off our final round for this exercise in round 3. So my team right now sits as Jonathan Taylor, CeeDee Lamb, and blank. The question is, do I want to go running back or wide receiver? I do want to go wide receiver, but I still think I still have DeAndre Swift higher than Cam Akers and higher than Nick Chubb on my list going into the next season as of right now. So because of the value, I am going to take DeAndre Swift. I do think I could have made a good case. I know I went on the rant about a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. And I also think you can't rule out a guy like Deontay Johnson. I know we don't know who the quarterback is, but he is the top wide receiver. It doesn't look like Juju Smith's going to be back. So those were the guys I was thinking. But because of the current value for me, I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift.
Okay. That makes sense. And I think Swift would have been my slam dunk next pick if you hadn't taken him there. So good job to steal him from me there. So it looks like if I wanted Andrews and Swift with that team 2 pick, I would have had to pick Swift and then Andrews. So got close, didn't quite get it. But right now, team 2 sitting with Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews. Like I said, I'm debating going that wide receiver, and Deontay Johnson is the next wide receiver on my list. But I'm going to go away from it, and I'm going to go with Antonio Gibson. I guess I'm going to let Cody pick all the wide receivers, which is not shocking because Cody loves wide receivers. But Antonio Gibson was better than we thought by the end of the season, but he was a little bit of a frustration. I think there's going to be a little bit of a rebound there. JD McKissick was taking some work from him. He is a free agent. We don't know if he's going to come back or not, but we're going to, in terms of this exercise, hope he doesn't, I guess, and see if Gibson gets even more snaps.
Wow, Gibson. I have 4 running backs higher than him heading into the season. So I
Okay.
don't even know if I would have taken him in this round, to be honest with you. But I understand the upside, the excitement behind it, why you would take, again, he's another guy that, showed some flashes. He just couldn't put it all together. And again, it's very hard this early in the season. We don't know who their quarterback will be. Will it be another year of Taylor Heineke? Will they? I've heard that they're going to be some big interest in Deshaun Watson if he becomes available and that legal thing gets situated out. They could be, another big player and a guy and some other big name quarterbacks to look out for. Will they go get a veteran like a Marcus Mariota? Something like that. We'll have to wait and see on that situation. I think the quarterback plays a big factor into that situation, honestly. But it's my turn. Team 3, I have Cooper Kupp and Jalen Waddle. And now the question is, do I go full no running back strategy with this team and get DeAndre Hopkins? That's a big question. Another guy, do I stick with the trend on this team, PPR receptions, and go get Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Ooh.
I think that'd be a lot of fun,
Yeah, it would.
but I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
I don't think. I'm tilting. Oh, this is not good. Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, or force a running back because I don't have one. I'm going to take
A wide receiver because you don't like taking running
I got DeAndre Hopkins in round 3 is kind of crazy in a 12-team draft. So
It is.
So the value of DeAndre Hopkins, yes, he's never consistent for my team. Team 3 is not me in real fantasy. But Cooper Kupp, Jalen Waddle, DeAndre Hopkins. Honestly, it probably should have been Hopkins and then Jalen Waddle.
But even yet,
should have flipped those and taken Hopkins at the end of round 2, but he made it back to me in round 3. I took a swing on an upside guy, so give me DeAndre Hopkins. Full tilt expression. Just change my pick on the fly.
I like it. And that's what happens in most drafts. Like, you can go in there with your ranking sheet. You can go in there with your draft strategy. And sometimes you have to read the draft. Sometimes you just have that gut feeling of, this is what I should do right here. And now I'm on to team 4, who has Austin Eckler, Cam Akers. Cody just took DeAndre Hopkins out from under me. So I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson, another guy who gets a lot of targets. I get that it's a little bit more of a risk now that you don't know who the quarterback's going to be in Pittsburgh, but I feel like he has a chance to be a quarterback's best friend, whoever does end up starting there in Pittsburgh, knowing the kind of offense that they run, knowing that teams are going to have to stack the box for Naji Harris because they like him being the centerpiece of the offense. I just hope he doesn't catch the drops again that he had before.
Definitely playing with some luck, some rolling the dice, I guess is what I was trying to say there. But I do like the Deontay Johnson pick, and he does kind of wrap up a tier for me. Mm-hmm. I know I was talking about Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's like right on the fringe of this tier and the next tier. For me, it's hard to know what the Lions are going to do. I mean, he was, a day 2 pick. He wasn't, like a guy we expected a lot of. He first on the certain, which is great. I mean, Stefan Diggs was a 5th round pick, and now he's going drafted in the 1st round. So where you were drafted after you put film on tape or your stuff on tape, I guess is whatever. It doesn't really matter your draft position. But I am going to go back to the running backs because there's still 4 running backs that I have on my board that are just mind-blowing that they're waiting this long to go to them. And there's actually 3 of them. And then the guy I'm going to take, because I think he's being forgotten about, but that is J.K. Dobbins.
Nice.
J.K. Dobbins.
He is someone who's being forgotten about a little bit.
He was taken, we forget because he had that early offseason injury last year, but the running back for the Baltimore Ravens is valuable. We saw Latavius Murray. He could barely run. We saw Devontae Freeman. They still had value from a week-to-week basis. J.K. Dobbins should be fully recovered by then. Another running back you're getting late or early in round 3 at this point, but, he pairs nicely with a Naji Harris. Again, this might be a little bit not what the board is telling you. The board might have told you to take the safe guy in Ezekiel Elliott, which, again, another guy we can't believe he's in round 3. But I went safe with Naji Harris and Keenan Allen. So let's go a little bit more upside with J.K. Dobbins.
And maybe this is me not liking Ezekiel Elliott, but he's not even the next guy on my board either. And the next running back on my board to go with Devontae Adams and Nick Chubb is going to be David Montgomery.
That was the next guy on my board as well. So
there you go. So David Montgomery, I'll take with pick 6. I think he pairs well with Nick Chubb. You already have your wide receiver 1 right there. And he's somebody who I think people always let slide a little bit more. Like, I don't know where you're going to see someone like a Chris Carson go this year, but in the past, I feel like Chris Carson was always that guy who deserved to be drafted higher than he always was. Montgomery is starting to become that guy, in my opinion. But round 3 is still probably a pretty good sweet spot for him, and he could play like a 2nd round running back.
No, I really like the Montgomery pick here. So I think that is definitely a solid one. I do have him above Ezekiel Elliott as well. I don't know. It's just maybe because he played hurt all season long, so he looked a little bit slower, but he's just slowly been like on a decline. We saw Tony Pollard look like the better running back when he got his opportunities. They're still going to ride with Ezekiel. He's still going to get his carries, but I think his days of being a top fantasy running back are down. Like I compare him like a guy that's a little bit lower on my list as well, who has been higher in years past is Josh Jacobs. He looks good in spurts, but he has those
Mhm.
disappointing weeks, and I think that's where we're at with Ezekiel Elliott. And I'm still hoping for more consistency out of the guys are drafting, even into the third round. I understand um, that. I know it is my pick now at Team 7. I know I just talked about consistency, and I'm going to take a guy that could be a little bit, back and forth on consistency here. But another guy we've seen taken as early as, pick 6 in last year's draft, still had almost 800 yards and a bunch of touchdowns this past season, still on a high powered offense. Could be a bigger part depending on who the quarterback is, but that is running back Aaron Jones. To pair him up with A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson, I get my first running back here on the board. I think that's a solid pick to have Aaron Jones be my RB1 when I have a guy like Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown leading in the receiver category.
No, and I feel like I heard a couple of teams this year that had some success that I mean, obviously Aaron Jones did not go in round 3 in this year's draft. He was probably a late round 1 or a round 2 guy, and they kind of used the hero running back strategy on him. Took him either late first, early second, put a couple of wide receivers around him, and they had some success. So the fact that you could slide him into the third round, I get why he did fall because you have the AJ Dillon experience over there, and you have to worry about him taking carries away from Jones. But I think especially if they don't have Rodgers next year, they're going to have to lean more on the run game. There's no denying Aaron Jones' talent. I think they'll be able to find a way to do enough around him to keep the pressure off of the run game. So I like him falling this far. It's just one of many guys who have fallen so far down the draft board this year. You're kind of like confused as to why they're there until you have to take a step back and look. And now we're on team 8 with CMC and Travis Kelce. Do I go with that next wide receiver? Do I finally be the person to take Zeke? I find it interesting there's so many running backs here that are in kind of committees, and you have to hope that they happen to get the lion's share of the carries, or they're just a little bit sketchy. The Ezekiel Elliott with Tony Pollard, the Aaron Jones with AJ Dillon, the Elijah Mitchell with all the other bevy of 49ers running backs. The only guy who seems to be a bell cow that's down here, and I'm still not in love with, is Saquon Barkley. But I'm going to go with a wide receiver here, and I'm going to go with Mike Evans.
Interesting.
We don't know if Chris Godwin's going to be back in Tampa Bay. We don't even know who their quarterback's going to be next year. But Mike Evans has performed well with pretty much every quarterback that has been around him so far. And he could be more of a focal point in offense. There could be a lot less around him now that there's no AJ Brown. Antonio Brown. And there could be no Chris Godwin as well.
Definitely an interesting pick. I was wondering when he was going to go with the news of no Tom Brady, no Antonio Brown. Would Chris Godwin go first, expecting him to go be a number 1 on a team? I think it's definitely worth monitoring as we go forward. For me, but it's still a good pick. I think your teammate CMC Travis Kelce, it's okay to take a little bit of risk at a running back. I mean, because basically Travis Kelce is your wide receiver, wide receiver, because Travis Kelce is your wide receiver 1 essentially. So
Pretty
you got
much,
Mike
yeah.
Evans, who I believe is still yet to have less than 1,000 yards in any season since he came into the league. So you're right. He only had Tom Brady for 2 years, but he's been a good wide receiver for 8. So it's not
Yep.
out of the question for him to still be a good guy. The touchdowns will probably go down in the red zone, but we'll have to wait and see on how that one all plays out. Team 9 is up here for their pick in the third round. Currently on their roster is Dalvin Cook and Stefan Diggs. Here is, some big question marks. Here, I think this is like the perfect spot for a guy like Ezekiel Elliott if you want to play a little bit safer. I think, I'll just give you the next. I'm debating between 3 running backs essentially here, and that is Ezekiel Elliott. Do I want to play safe? And then it's a guy in the committee and Damian Harris. But we saw Ramondre Stevenson play well enough as a rookie last year. How much do you trust that? And then the big question mark for me as a guy, it probably might be a little high for some people, is James Conner. And it's worth noting that both him and Chase Edmonds are free agents this year. And I only
Hmm.
think one of them will be back in Arizona. And I tend to think it'll be James Conner. And we saw how
Ooh.
he looked when it was just him. I think they'll draft a guy, they'll keep Eno Benjamin, and they'll let James Conner have the reins. Granted, he'll have a lot more attempts than he did last year. The touchdown number might come down. But for me, I am going to, even though I have Ezekiel Elliott higher on my board with the team that I currently have, Dalvin Cook and Stefan Diggs, I am going to go with James Conner. It is a last minute pivot over a guy like Ezekiel Elliott. Like I mentioned, he is higher on my board, but I am going to go in with this expectation that James Conner will be the running back with no Chase Edmonds in Arizona next year. Another high powered offense. We see him use both in the run and pass game, and that running back in Arizona has been important for the last few years under Cliff Kingsbury. So another solid running back option to add here in round 3.
Interesting. I like it. So now we're on to team 10. Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase. I'm going to take T. Higgins and no, I'm kidding.
Joe
He is
Burrow.
probably the next Bengal. It could be Joe Burrow too. It's between them two to go for this team because it's going to be the all Bengal team.
Before you make your pick, you mentioned T.
Okay.
Higgins.
Yeah.
And I meant to bring this up when you talked about drafting Jamar Chase, but I'll do it now since you just mentioned him. Last year, we all took Brandon Ayuk over, and we said the value might be in Deebo Samuel. We all took Robert Woods and said the value might be in Cooper Kupp. Honestly, heading into the drafts at this point, I'm not chasing Jamar Chase. I think he's special. I think he's a great player. But T. Higgins is a very solid option that you might be able to get in rounds 4 through 7, depending on where you're drafting or who you're drafting with. That could be a top. He could have finished above Jamar Chase. So I do like the T. Higgins name. Now, obviously not taking him here. That was a joke for being the whole Bengals team. But do think about that too when you Jamar Chase and how good T. Higgins was. He did have that spurt at the beginning of the season, but he came on strong. He was their top option for a few weeks, and then Jamar Chase became the top option in the fantasy playoffs. So that's what we remember most recently. But don't sleep on T. Higgins in the later rounds of the draft.
That's true. And I don't think he's going to fall that far. He'll probably go somewhere in the next 3-4 rounds, I would assume. But yeah, no, not actually going to take another Bengal for this spot. But part of me, like, where, like, I almost wonder, like, I'm just trying to think. In our League of Record draft, the end of the first round, like that 1-2 turn was Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott. Yes. They're both still on the board near the end of round 3. I get all the question marks for him, but like in my head, I'm thinking, how far do they fall before I have to say the upside is enough? I think this is one of the spots that I have to take the one. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, which one do you trust more? Which I guess if you're going to pick one of them, that's going to tell me who. But
yeah, so I'll give you a little walkthrough. So if you look at the amount of carries in that offense, you lean Saquon because Saquon is pretty much a 3-down back. They don't like to supplement him, it seems like, quite as much. Zeke has Tony Pollard over his shoulder. Who has been healthier and more successful over the last few years? It's Zeke. So I think Mixon and Jamar Chase is a solid base that I can go away from the safer pick and go to the slightly more edgy pick. And I'm going to take Saquon Barkley, hoping that he ends up staying healthy and stays being a 3-down back. And that could be the slam dunk I need to turn this team, where maybe it's sketchy having 2 people on the same team, can turn into a championship contender.
Dude, I do not blame you in the least for taking Barkley here. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, is there too much recency bias into it? Why are these guys falling? Like, they've been, top picks. Even last year when they went 10-11 in our 10-team draft that you brought up, we're like, oh, that could be the steal of the draft. I mean, it wasn't. And maybe that's part of the reason. We both played in leagues where they were already being taken in the second round, essentially. And now they're just dropping more. And there's a lot of young players and upsides. And, these older guys that we've been disappointed on, it's why we call it the way too early. We're very excited about those guys. So I wouldn't be surprised if when we do this again in the middle of the summer that Barkley ends up back in round 2 if Zeke goes up in round 2, but I'm going to take the other one. I am going to take Ezekiel Elliott here. I mean, he's higher than some other running backs on my early prediction boards than some guys. I think Zeke, you know he's going to get carries.
Hmm.
And I think at this point, we're talking Ezekiel Elliott, and the other running backs I'm looking at are Leonard Fournette, Miles Sanders, those guys. Fournette, we don't know what team he's going to play on. Miles Sanders didn't have a touchdown all season. And
It's got to change. It's gotta.
right, but the Eagles always have 4 running backs, and it's always like,
Yes.
what are you going to do there? So I do like Ezekiel Elliott. Again, I have Deebo Samuel, Javonte Williams. Zeke seems a little bit safer. He could be like I took some big swings early, trying to balance out my team a little bit in that way. But again, Zeke in round 3 seems like a huge pick, but I also know I'm taking him in round 3 because he could bust.
Exactly. And I don't know, like, because when we got this far down, it seems like everybody we're picking is in a good spot. And then I get to Zeke and Barkley, and it's like, should they be this low? And like you said, it probably will adjust out to the middle a little bit as we move through the summer. Like, this is probably the overreaction. Maybe you don't take James Conner that high, but I do love the fact that you put the name James Conner out there because you know he could be a big guy. Maybe DeAndre Swift falls a little bit further, and Antonio Gibson as well, because we are pumping the brakes a little bit more. We're not being quite as optimistic. And then maybe Zeke and Barkley do slide back up towards that second round. But I just feel like they had to at least be included in this list because them falling out of the third round seemed a little bit ridiculous. But I
But
was
I could
kind of
see it
hoping
on
you
the same
let
point
Zeke
too.
fall to me. What was that?
I mean, I could see it too. Like if Zeke and Barkley fall out of the top 3 rounds, it'll be like, to me, I'm honestly evaluating them like I would a Chris Carson. Now, granted, he has a neck injury
Mm,
that, he's on a different situation. But the last few years, Chris Carson was a guy that you knew was going to get carries. You knew he'd have a couple good games, but you didn't want on your fantasy team. And unfortunately, that's where I'm at with Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley.
yeah.
Like, their guy, like, what you're getting. Like, they're not fun picks. You don't expect them to win you your league. You don't expect them to, be I got you. Maybe in round 4 you start to feel that way again about them, but I think that's why they're falling at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but I was kind of hoping you'd let Zeke fall to me because I would have taken him, I think, with Team 12 here, who has Tyreek Hill and Alvin Kamara so far.
I will. I,
Because go ahead.
I was gonna say, I will say, if you need to think about it now, since I stole your pick, a guy that would be in consideration here, and maybe I'm stealing your thunder, would be Josh Allen. I feel like he will be the first quarterback off the draft, but I'm a big proponent to not drafting quarterbacks high, which is why I didn't. But I can make the case for Josh Allen being the top quarterback taken at the end of round 3. So he was in consideration too. But again, there's a lot of decent quarterbacks, good quarterbacks. I mean, even on my current list, like Jalen Hurts is currently quarterback 7, and we saw him be a top 5 quarterback. Matt Stafford,
Mhm.
you can get late in the rounds, and he'll be the value for quarterbacks often is, the top quarterback and the 12th quarterback. It's a narrow margin. So that's why I went with another running back here, but I did want to give Josh Allen a shout out.
No, I agree with you there too. I probably wouldn't take him in the third round. The earliest I ever want to take a quarterback is round 3. I see plenty of times where he goes in round 1 and 2 in drafts, and I'm just ripping my hair out. But I still normally it would be like if Patrick Mahomes was the top quarterback in these last few years, I wouldn't even think about touching him unless he fell into round 4. And that's probably where I'd be at with Josh Allen here. The earliest I would take him is on this turn if I felt really confident with my team and thought Josh Allen could give me that little bit of an edge at the position. But I'm not even quite convinced on that. So don't worry. I'm glad you mentioned it. That is not stealing my thunder.
Well,
I think
for
I
you,
go ahead.
I would say for you, Mahomes might even make more sense. Again, you're probably not taking him here, but the combo
Because of the stack.
With Tyreek
Yeah.
Hill would probably make more sense. But again, this is why we're not taking a quarterback so high, because you have Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson. Why race to get one of those guys that'll probably finish, at most 40 points from the number 1 to number 6 on that group? Like that's what we're saying with the quarterback strategy.
Exactly. But you're right, Mahomes would kind of make sense because of the Tyreek Hill stack, but earliest I would take him is in that 4th round of this turn. Probably want to wait until the 5-6 turn if I was trying to stack him with Hill, and he's probably not falling that far, which is fine. I'm going to try to pair a running back with Kamara because I think he is a much more sketchy candidate than Tyreek Hill. I'm going to go with like the hero wide receiver strategy. I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm confident my wide receivers are Tyreek Hill. Alvin Kamara, I'm going to pair with a running back, and I'm between Leonard Fournette, which is an interesting situation. He's a free agent as well. If he's going to stay in Tampa Bay, if Tampa Bay is going to be quite as potent without Tom Brady, Elijah Mitchell, who we already talked about the San Francisco backfield, and Josh Jacobs, who's another name we've mentioned so far, but we don't know exactly how he's going to be because he's such an up and down back. I'm going to probably go with the upside here, thinking that he has kind of earned that number 1 job to go along Deebo Samuel. That's Elijah Mitchell. I think he deserves some love. His name deserves to be in the conversation in this part of the draft. And I think it's going to shake out throughout the offseason once we see how they prepare their running back room in the offseason as to where he's exactly going to fall. But if it falls the way I think it is with they're going to have Raheem Mostert out, and I still don't think that they love Trey Sermon as much as they wish they would have, it should be Elijah Mitchell's job first, paired with Deebo, which we showed that Mitchell can still be a very successful fantasy running back, even with Deebo taking carries from him.
I like it. I think that's a good place to wrap up our 3 rounds. I do like the Elijah Mitchell. But since we're talking San Francisco running backs, I do want to go back to Deebo Samuel real quick. I know this show is going on forever, so we thank you for hanging in there with us. But Deebo Samuel, if he comes out next year with running back and wide receiver eligibility, how does that move him up at your list at all? Because he's at 2 spots.
So move him up from where we have him at 11. Let's just say he's at 11 if he just has wide receiver strategy or wide receiver eligibility. If you split him wide receiver running back, he could jump above a Joe Mixon or a Dalvin Cook. I could put him up to like 8th, 9th on my list. I would say a small jump, but I think he's already valued so high, and we are valuing wide receivers almost as high as running backs at this point that I feel like it's not a dramatic change. I don't think it moves them up to the top tier running backs or anything like that, but you could see a small jump there.
I think he would actually jump up pretty high for me just because, then you could still get your wide receivers that you like and play them in the running back slot. But again, I don't foresee that happening except maybe on Yahoo because they're the ones that like to do that the most. But I think on your sleeper app, your NFL hashtag not a sponsor, maybe ESPN. I don't think any of them are going to be switching Deebo Samuel anytime soon. But that is our 3-round mock draft